Welcome to our channel, Book by Book. We dive into the best ideas from key business and self-help books, and, well, we break them down into practical knowledge for you, a shortcut to really getting informed. Today, we're tackling a really foundational book on influence and strategy. It's Robert Mayer's 2006 classic, How to Win Any Negotiation. Now, when most of us hear negotiation, maybe we think, I don't know, big corporate deals.
Yeah.
Or maybe just haggling over a car price.
Right, the typical stuff. But Mayer's view is, well, much bigger. And honestly, way more relevant to everyday life. He argues that negotiation is basically constant. If you're, say, a manager figuring out resources or a parent setting rules or, asking for that raise.
You're negotiating.
Exactly. It's not some separate scary event. It's just baked into how we interact in business and, everywhere else. And Mayer spotted this fundamental gap. He saw that most people treat these moments like a skirmish. Unplanned, stressful,
Reactive.
totally reactive, instead of seeing it for what it should be, a long-term, thought-out strategy.
I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway for me from the whole book. That feeling when you get blindsided in a negotiation or maybe you lose your cool.
Yeah.
Mayer says that's almost always a failure of strategy, not like a personal failing.
Precisely. And you
Yeah.
should know, he spent decades watching, litigating, compiling insights from over 200 really skilled negotiators. And his core argument, it really shifts your perspective. Negotiation isn't this battle you win with, like brute force or anger.
No shouting matches.
Definitely not. It's a strategic conversation, something you orchestrate using finesse, understanding psychology, and, preparation. Winning, for Mayer, is about getting inside the other side's reality, understanding what they need, and then finding ways to align your interests with theirs. You become a problem solver, not the enemy.
And if we don't do that, if we just walk in cold, unprepared, reactive.
Well, Mayer suggests the cost is pretty high. Failure, he says, it's rarely about the actual deal itself being bad.
Yep.
It's usually rooted much deeper. Things like a poor psychological stance going in, that reactive mindset we talked about, or just, a messy, disorganized process.
So the aim is to shift, to stop feeling like a victim, pushed around by demands.
And become the orchestrator, the one guiding the conversation, steering it gently towards the outcome you want.
Makes sense.
And to help us make that shift, from just reacting to actually influencing, Mayer gives us this really memorable toolkit, a structure.
Right, Lancer.
That's the one, Lancer. It's an acronym, stands for the 6 key strategic levers you can pull in pretty much any conversation.
Let's see if I remember. Linkage, alignment, needs.
Yep. Control, evaluation, and reading. Lancer.
Okay, Lancer. And that framing, thinking of yourself as the orchestrator, that feels really powerful.
It is. Because the Lancer framework, it's not just some checklist you tick off. It's more like a system, a way to proactively steer things.
We'll definitely walk through all 6 of those levers, but you mentioned something crucial first. Mayer is, well, pretty insistent that none of the tactics, none of the external stuff works.
If you haven't won the internal game first,
That's where he starts, isn't it? Which feels a bit unusual for a negotiation book.
It is unusual, but it's fundamental to his whole approach. Lesson 1 is basically winning starts inside your own head, with your inner self. The absolute first step, before you even think about tactics or what you're going to say, is to negotiate with your own beliefs, your internal system.
Why is that so foundational, though? I mean, shouldn't we be focused on, the facts, the figures, preparing our arguments?
Facts and figures are important, absolutely. But Mayer argues they can only get you so far if your own inner voice is whispering doubt. Think about it. If you walk into that room already feeling like you're at a disadvantage, maybe you feel hesitant, or like you don't really deserve what you're asking for.
Yeah, I can see that.
That belief, it shows up immediately. Your body language might become passive. Maybe you speak more softly. You might even make concessions too early. You just react.
So your belief system becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly that. Mayer puts it super bluntly. Winning begins with your inner self. Full stop.
And that clicks. Your psychological posture really dictates your physical posture, and then that drives the tactical choices you make at the table.
Precisely. And to really drive this point home, he uses this fantastic analogy, the Great Wallenda effect.
Oh, the tightrope walker. Carl Wallenda.
That's him. When he successfully crossed Niagara Falls on that high wire, the reason he could do it, Mayer argues, was this unwavering internal belief. He knew he would succeed. He wasn't distracted by fear, by doubt. His focus was absolute because he'd already won that mental battle inside.
And the contrast is?
The contrast is his final attempt, the one that was fatal. By his own account beforehand, he'd spent all this time worrying, Worrying about the wire, the wind, the weather, his internal state was fractured. He'd lost that inner focus.
Okay, so the Walenda effect in negotiation isn't just about being positive. It's about cultivating this really focused belief in success, blocking out the self-doubt.
Yes, but it's not naive optimism. Mayer isn't saying just, wish upon a star.
Right.
He's talking about a controlled, strategic belief. You're not just telling yourself, I'll win. You're actively crafting an internal script. Something like, okay, I know my value, I've prepared for different scenarios, and I will maintain control of this process, no matter how they react.
So it's about channeling that nervous energy into focus, not just pretending it isn't there.
Exactly, channeling it strategically. The book gives this great example of two job candidates. One candidate, her inner script was basically, wow, I'm just lucky they're even talking to me. So naturally, she accepted a pretty low offer.
Yeah.
Her colleague, though, going for the same type of job, consciously rewrote her script. She told herself, okay, based on market rates, my value is X, my contribution is clear, and I'm going to articulate that confidently.
And the result?
She got a significantly higher salary. Why? Because her belief, her internal stance, allowed her to present her case, her facts, with conviction. Not like she was begging.
Okay, so that's our first really critical, actionable thing for you listening. Before you go into any important discussion, could be a performance review, buying a car, whatever your very first tactical move is mental. You need to craft that internal script. I expect a positive outcome here. I am prepared, and I will manage this process. That psychological prep, that's the bedrock.
Absolutely. And that bedrock, that strong internal foundation, is what allows us to then effectively use the external tools. Which brings us to the first parts of Lancer. Starting with the interpersonal side, linkage and alignment.
Okay, linkage and alignment. You said these are about harnessing momentum. Let's start with linkage. What's that exactly?
Linkage is, it's fundamentally about establishing rapport, building a genuine connection.
So making friends.
Not necessarily friends, but making sure the other party doesn't immediately see you as an adversary. Maybe they see you as an ally, or at least, a reasonable person, someone they can trust.
It sounds a bit soft, like maybe a nice to have.
It might sound that way, but Mayer argues it's based on hard science. Humans are just wired to be more cooperative, more flexible, with people they like and trust, even on a basic level. So linkage means finding some common ground. It could be anything, even just complaining about the traffic together before you dive into the tough stuff.
Yeah.
It softens the ground for the difficult conversations that might follow.
Okay, so you build that initial connection with linkage, and that sets the stage for alignment.
Precisely. Linkage is kind of the prerequisite. Alignment is the more strategic move. It's where you take the other side's existing goals, their energy, their interests, and you leverage those to actually support your objective.
So you're not trying to force your agenda on them.
No, you're showing them how your agenda helps theirs.
Mayer has an analogy for this too, right?
Yeah, the surfing analogy, it's great. You don't fight the wave, right? You don't try to stop its power. You get on it, you steer it, you direct its existing momentum where you want to go.
Okay, I like that. So if the other side has a big goal, maybe they want rapid growth, or they're really focused on reducing risk, you frame your request as the perfect way for them to achieve that goal.
Exactly. Let's flesh out that procurement manager example you mentioned earlier because it makes it really clear.
Okay, so the manager needs better pricing on some components. If she just goes in demanding a lower price.
Instant friction. Resistance.
Right. But instead, she starts by exploring the vendor's goals. She asks questions, listens, and finds out the vendor is really pushing hard to grow their market share in a new region, say Southeast Asia. It's tough. It's their big focus.
Okay, so she's identified their wave, their momentum. Now comes alignment.
She then frames her ask around that goal. She might say something like, look, I understand expanding in Southeast Asia is your top priority right now. That's a big move.
Acknowledging their goal first. Linkage.
So how about this? If we can agree on, say, a 15% price reduction on these core components for this year, which, frankly, meets my budget security needs, then we can offer you an exclusive 3-year deal to source those specific components just for your new Southeast Asia operation.
Ah, clever.
This gives you the guaranteed volume you need over there to justify the investment and really hit the ground running.
See how the conversation shifts? The vendor isn't just thinking about, oh no, I'm losing 15%.
They're thinking, wow, guaranteed volume in a new market, that solves a huge problem for us.
Exactly. The negotiation transforms. It goes from being a fight over price to this collaborative effort where both sides are trying to achieve their separate important goals.
Which leads us straight to our second actionable point for everyone listening. Before you make your ask, always try to find out what's your highest priority right now. Ask that question. Then frame your proposal as the best way for them to achieve that priority.
Perfect. So we've built some linkage, we've used alignment to ride their wave. Now Mayer takes us deeper into the psychology with the next two levers, needs and control.
Needs and control. Okay, this sounds like we're moving beyond just the surface goals.
Way beyond. We're getting into the emotional drivers, the things that really motivate people's decisions, often subconsciously.
Mayer's point here is that under every stated position, I need this budget or I want that salary, there are deeper fundamental human needs, right?
Absolutely. Universal needs. Things like the need for recognition, for security, for independence, maybe for fairness. These are powerful drivers.
And why does tapping into those needs matter so much?
Because if you only argue against their logical position, you just trigger their logical defenses. They'll argue back with their own logic. But if you can frame your message in a way that speaks directly to their underlying need,
you bypass the logical argument.
you engage their emotional willingness to cooperate. It resonates differently. Messages that fulfill an unmet need have a much, much higher chance of being accepted because they feel right on an emotional level.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about maybe a small business owner who's demanding what seems like an unreasonably high down payment for a project. That's their position.
Okay.
What's the underlying need likely driving that? Probably security, right? Fear that the project might fall through or that they won't get paid fully.
Makes sense.
So instead of just arguing about the dollar amount, you address the need for security. Maybe you offer stronger collateral, or you show them a robust insurance policy covering the work, or you agree to milestone payments tied to progress if you make them feel secure.
They might become more flexible on the actual down payment amount.
Exactly, because you've addressed the real issue, the underlying emotional driver.
Okay. That's a really powerful distinction. Speak to the need, not just the position. And this leads us perfectly into control, which is probably the most counterintuitive part of Mayer's whole Lancer framework.
Right, because most people hear control in negotiation and think it means, what? Dominating the conversation, talking the most.
Yeah, being the loudest voice in the room. Mayer argues it's the exact opposite.
Really? How?
He says control is achieved primarily through listening. Active, strategic listening.
Listening gives you control. That seems backwards.
Think about it this way. When the other side is talking, what are they doing? They're essentially handing you the roadmap to their thinking.
How so?
They reveal their priorities. They hint at their fears. They show you where the openings might be. And crucially, they often reveal those underlying needs we just talked about.
Okay, I see that.
This is where Mayer drops that famous line. Better to ask a better question than make a better argument.
Why is that? Because making an argument often just triggers resistance, people digging their heels. But asking a smart, strategic question, that elicits information. It gets them talking, revealing the very things you need to know to line your next move effectively.
Okay, let's dig into how listening translates to control. What kinds of questions actually generate this leverage you're talking about?
They need to be probing, definitely open-ended, and sometimes reflective. So instead of a closed question like, will you agree to our terms? Which just gets a yes or no.
You ask something different.
You ask something like, what do you see as the 3 biggest challenges if we try to implement this plan? Or maybe, help me understand the main criteria you use internally when you're evaluating a successful partnership like this.
Okay. Asking those kinds of questions forces them to actually spell out their thinking, their criteria.
Exactly. And once they've articulated their criteria, what can you do?
You can use their own criteria as the standard to measure your proposal against.
Bingo. You're subtly controlling the framework of the discussion. You're shaping the ground rules, even if they're doing most of the talking. You're leading by listening.
This brings us to another really practical takeaway, maybe our third actionable item. Let's call it the 60-40 rule.
Okay.
Spend roughly 60% of your time in the negotiation actively listening, observing, asking these strategic questions, and only about 40% of the time actually talking, presenting your case.
That feels about right.
Yeah.
Because your observations, what you learn about their needs, their fears, their decision criteria, that's where your real leverage comes from, not from just talking louder or longer.
Let's revisit that salary negotiation example. The candidate who just walks in and demands, say, $6 amount because that's what they want.
Often hits a brick wall, right? Sorry, budget says no.
But the successful candidate using this approach would first ask questions. What are the key performance metrics for this role? How does the company measure success here? Can you tell me about past examples of high performance being recognized?
Right. They gather intel first.
Then, when they make their ask, it's not just an arbitrary number. It's framed as, perhaps, recognition for hitting specific benchmarks they know the company values, or tied directly to the company's stated need for future growth and proven success.
By asking those smart questions first, they gain the leverage needed to structure their argument in a way that resonates with the company's own logic and needs.
It really is like turning the negotiation into that collaborative dance Mayer talks about. If you can anticipate the rhythm, understand the unspoken needs of your partner.
You can lead gently, but effectively. You guide the dance.
Okay, so we've covered the crucial inner game, the mindset. And we've looked at the psychological levers in Lancer linkage, alignment, needs, and control through listening. What's next?
Now we move into the final, very practical elements of Lancer, evaluation and reading. And then we'll touch on the critical role of preparation.
Right, evaluation. This sounds more objective.
It is. Evaluation is all about the necessity of grounding the discussion in objective reality. You need to introduce neutral, credible benchmarks, standards.
Why is that so important?
Because it helps reduce resistance, and crucially, it depersonalizes the demand. When you can anchor what you're asking for to some kind of external standard, maybe an industry salary report, a third-party appraisal, competitor pricing data, you shift the logic.
How does it shift?
It moves away from being just your opinion versus their opinion, or your desire versus their reluctance. It becomes about how your proposal stacks up against an objective external reality.
That seems vital, especially because negotiations can get emotional, right? They can spiral into, I want this versus I won't give that.
Exactly. Injecting objective data forces the conversation back towards logic. It's no longer about whether I personally deserve more. It's about whether what I'm proposing aligns with established, credible market facts.
The book's example of buying a car really nails this, doesn't it?
It really does, instead of just haggling based on the dealer's sticker price, which is often inflated.
The smart negotiator comes armed with data.
Right. They use something like the Kelley Blue Book wholesale value or maybe recent auction data for that specific model. They're not really arguing with the dealer anymore. They're using the industry's own standards to establish a fair, objective, non-emotional starting point for the deal.
And that gives us our fourth actionable item. Before you go into a negotiation, always prepare at least one credible, neutral benchmark. Find that market rate, that industry report, that third-party valuation, something solid to anchor the discussion logically.
Absolutely critical. Now, working hand in hand with evaluation is the final piece of Lancer, reading.
Reading, as in reading the room, reading the person.
Exactly. If evaluation is like the GPS that anchors you to reality, reading is like watching the traffic signs as you drive. It's the ability to decode the other person's decision cues in real time.
This sounds subtle. What kind of cues are we talking about?
It is subtle. You're observing how the other party is processing information, how they're reacting. Are they suddenly trying to rush things along? Did their body language just shift? Maybe they crossed their arms or leaned back abruptly.
Or maybe a specific question you asked was met with, like, a really long silence. Or a nervous habit, like tapping a pen.
Precisely. Those are all signals. They're telling you something important about what's going on inside their head.
So what might a sudden silence indicate, for instance?
Often, a sudden or prolonged silence means they're doing some critical internal math. They might be checking budget numbers, mentally weighing concessions, or thinking through the implications of what you just said.
And if they suddenly seem rushed,
that could signal they're facing some external pressure, maybe a deadline you don't know about, or perhaps they feel they're losing ground and want to wrap things up quickly.
Okay, so you pick up on these cues. Then what? How does that help?
These cues guide your very next move. If you read tension or resistance after you make a specific offer, you know you've hit a sensitive point. So maybe you slow down, you probe gently to understand the source of that tension, rather than just pushing harder.
And if you read eagerness, maybe they lean forward, their tone changes.
Then you might recognize an opportunity. Maybe you push for a slightly quicker close, or perhaps try to lock in a slightly better term before they have second thoughts or consult someone else.
So this is why active listening, which we called control, and this reading skill are so tightly linked. You have to be paying close attention to pick up these signals.
They're inseparable. You can't read the signs if you're not watching the road, right?
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so that covers the Lancer framework. Linkage, alignment, needs, control, evaluation, reading. But maybe it doesn't stop there, does he? He talks a lot about preparation.
Oh, hugely. Beyond the Lancer tactics themselves, Mayer really emphasizes preparation and the ability to adapt. He even provides this resource he calls the Dealmaker's Playbook.
The playbook, what's in that?
It's basically a collection of, I think, 38 common negotiation scenarios. Everything from complex business deals like mergers or leases, down to more personal situations like job interviews, handling an IRS audit, even dealing with a difficult landlord.
Wow, 38 specific scenarios. Why so many? Isn't every negotiation unique?
The specifics might vary, yes. But Mayer's point is that the types of situations we find ourselves negotiating in are often quite predictable and repeatable. We face similar patterns again and again.
Ah, so success comes not from having a crystal ball, but from preparing for the likely scenarios you'll encounter.
Exactly. He calls it scenario-based preparation. The goal is to make sure you never walk in completely cold. For common situations, you should have thought through the likely dynamics, prepared some key questions, considered potential sticking points, and maybe even outlined some contingency plans.
It's about having a game plan, even if you know you'll have to adjust it on the fly.
Precisely. Think about the psychological difference it makes. Imagine preparing for a job interview versus preparing for, say, that IRS audit scenario.
Very different mindsets and preparations needed.
Coolly. The audit requires this intense focus on facts, documents, objective proof, really leaning on the evaluation lever. The job interview, on the other hand, probably requires more focus on building connection, showing future value, understanding needs. Linkage and alignment are key there.
So by studying these playbooks or just thinking through the common scenarios in your own field or life,
You become much more adaptable. The book mentions a franchise buyer who reviewed the relevant playbook scenario. Because of that prep, they knew exactly which 3 or 4 key questions to ask about lease terms and termination clauses, things that ended up saving them a lot of money later.
questions an unprepared buyer might just completely overlook in the excitement of the deal.
Easily. It's like a quarterback reading the defense before the snap. They have a primary plan, but they've also prepared for blitzes, different coverages. They can adjust because they've anticipated the possibilities.
Okay, that leads nicely into our 6th actionable item then. Before you enter a negotiation, really think about the scenario you're walking into. Review typical patterns for that situation if you can, and prepare 3 to 5 key strategic questions ahead of time.
And remember, these aren't just polite get-to-know-you questions. They should be loaded questions, designed specifically to elicit critical information that will strengthen your position or reveal their needs.
Got it. So, mindset, Lancer tactics, scenario preparation. Is there one final piece to Mayer's puzzle?
Yes, there is. And it's a big one, especially for people who tend to shy away from disagreement. It's how to handle conflict.
Ah, conflict. Most people try to avoid that in negotiations, right? Smooth things over.
That's the instinct, yeah. But Mayer argues that truly winning, in the sense of achieving the best possible outcome, often isn't about avoiding conflict or disagreement at all.
So what is it about?
It's about channeling that conflict strategically, seeing resistance not as a threat, not as a personal attack, but as valuable information.
Information? How is pushback information?
Because resistance, Mayer says, almost always signals something important. It might signal a hidden interest you haven't uncovered yet, or an unmet need that's blocking agreement, or maybe a constraint they haven't fully explained.
Okay, that requires a pretty significant mindset shift, especially if you're conflict averse. When you hear a flat no, the natural tendency is to just withdraw or get defensive.
Right. Mayer teaches us to get curious instead. That no or that pushback isn't the end of the road. It's a signpost. It's telling you there's something else going on under the surface that you need to understand.
So instead of reacting with frustration, you react with inquiry.
Exactly. But the type of inquiry matters. You don't ask, why won't you agree with me? That's confrontational, puts them on the defensive.
So what do you ask?
You ask something more collaborative, more exploratory, like, help me understand what worry or need might be preventing you from saying yes to this, or what would need to change for this to become possible, or even just what's standing in the way.
Ah, that phrasing shifts the dynamic immediately. It goes from being me versus you to us versus the problem.
Precisely. It reframes the interaction from confrontation to joint problem solving. How can we solve this together?
And this connects back to one of our earlier actionable items, number 5, using conditional framing, those if-then offers.
Yes, that's a perfect technique for channeling conflict constructively. Let's use that example again. An employee asks for a raise. The manager pushes back, citing budget constraints. Sorry, no budget for raises right now.
A typical dead end.
But the employee channeling conflict doesn't argue about the budget. They accept it as the current reality and pivot. They use an if-then-then frame.
How would that sound?
They might say, okay, I understand the budget situation currently. If, however, I were able to achieve specific, measurable outcome, maybe bringing in 3 new key clients by the end of Q3, then would the budget allow for additional compensation in Q4?
That's brilliant. You're not fighting the no.
You're acknowledging it, I understand the budget constraint, and then immediately channeling the conversation towards a future path around that constraint. You're defining what would make a yes possible later on.
And that often leads to more creative solutions, doesn't it? Because you're designing around the obstacle, not just trying to smash through it.
Absolutely. Plus, think about the psychology for the manager in that example.
How?
That conditional if-then offer also meets their likely underlying need for control and risk mitigation. They don't feel like they're just giving money away based on a request. They feel like they're investing in a specific, guaranteed future outcome that benefits the company. It makes the yes much easier down the line.
Okay, this feels like a really comprehensive framework. We've gone from the absolute necessity of the inner game, the mindset,
Right, the one effect.
through the entire Lancer toolkit: linkage, alignment, needs, control via listening, evaluation with benchmarks, and reading cues.
Then added the crucial layers of scenario-based preparation and strategically channeling conflict.
It's a lot, but it fits together really logically. Maybe we should try to quickly consolidate the big ideas.
Good idea. I think Mayer's whole strategy really rests on maybe 3 core pillars, all of which are supported by using that Lancer framework effectively. Remember, linkage, alignment, needs, control, evaluation, and reading. Mastering those gives you the tools to guide the whole process.
Okay, pillar number 1 seems absolutely clear. It's mindset over mechanics. We learned that right at the start with the Wallenda effect. Your internal belief, your perspective, how prepared you feel, that's not just fluff, it's the absolute foundation.
Couldn't agree more. If you haven't mentally prepared yourself to succeed, you're probably inadvertently preparing to fail. Your tactics won't land right.
Then the second big pillar seems to be listening as strategy. This was the counterintuitive part about control. Mayer totally flips the script. Real control, real influence comes not from dominating the conversation,
but from asking those sharp strategic questions and then listening with intense focus. Listening for the value, the priorities, the fears, the openings. That's where your leverage actually comes from.
And the third pillar has to be objective anchoring, using those neutral, third-party, credible benchmarks, the evaluation piece.
Yes, because that pulls the negotiation out of the realm of subjective wants and emotions and forces it back toward a shared objective reality. It removes bias, reduces defensiveness, and just makes the logic clearer for everyone.
Okay, those 3 pillars: mindset, listening as strategy, and objective anchoring, supported by Lancer. That feels like a solid summary.
And maybe we should quickly run through those actionable items again, the practical tools people can start using right away.
Great idea. Let's do a quick list. First, set your mindset before you even get to the table. Tell yourself, I expect a positive outcome, and I will control the process.
Second, use linkage and alignment. Actively find out what's most important to the other side, their core goal or need, and frame your offer as the solution to that.
Third, remember the 60-40 rule. Aim to spend about 60% of your time actively listening and observing, only 40% talking. Let them give you the intel.
Fourth, always prepare at least one credible, neutral benchmark. A market rate, competitor data, evaluation, something objective to anchor your request logically.
Fifth, use conditional framing. Those if-then offers are powerful for overcoming objections and creating flexibility. If you can do X, then I can do Y.
Sixth, prepare strategically for this scenario. Think about the common patterns and prepare 3 to 5 key, loaded questions designed to get you the information you need.
And the 7th one, which ties together reading and control. Observe those decision cues. Watch the tone, the body language, notice the silences, and be ready to adapt your approach instantly based on what you're reading.
And maybe an 8th, circling back to conflict. When you hear pushback or a no, get curious, don't get defensive, ask, what worry or need is behind that? Or what would make this possible? turn it into problem solving.
That's a fantastic list of takeaways.
How to win any negotiation really is more than just a negotiation book. It's kind of a master class in influence, applicable way beyond the boardroom.
Absolutely. And that core message that success comes from guiding the conversation through preparation, strategy, deep listening, and alignment, not by trying to overpower anyone. That's incredibly empowering.
It really is. Remember Mayer's line, when you shift from reacting to influencing, you change the rules of the game.
It makes you realize you probably hold a lot more control over outcomes than you typically think.
Definitely. So the final thought for you listening is, don't feel like you have to master all of this overnight. Just start. Pick one technique from today. Maybe it's just consciously setting your mindset before your next important conversation, or maybe preparing one objective benchmark.
Just start applying one thing. See how it changes the dynamic. Lead with intention, prepare with purpose, and begin orchestrating your own success, one conversation at a time.
And if you found this summary useful, if it sparked some ideas, we'd be really grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel, Book by Book. We're always bringing more helpful summaries like this.
Please do share it with friends or colleagues who you think might benefit from learning these negotiation strategies too.
And of course, hitting that like button really does help. It motivates our team to keep digging into these great books and bring you the best summaries we can.
Thanks so much for joining us on Book by Book today.